Hello, and welcome to the second week of the course American Musical Theater. This is the second lecture among several this semester that will introduce some of the ideas you've been reading about and viewing. It's not meant to be comprehensive, the lectures will not rehash everything you've read or seen, and it's meant to generate as many questions from you as answers from me. You must continue to do all the reading and viewing, as these lectures will not replace that. I hope they will inform your discussions in the forums and provide fuel for your interest and information that will help in your further understanding of the course materials. This lecture will focus on American musical theater in the 1920s and 1930s, on Cradle Will Rock and Oklahoma. The financial excesses of the 1920s in the US and around the world led to the stock market crash of 1929, which had an enormous effect on the development of the musical in the 1930s. Your texts discuss how the lack of money affected the kind of product that Broadway was producing, not only in terms of level of spectacle, but also in terms of subject matter. In your forum discussions, you've already been discussing the differences between the perceptions of entertainment, or things that make you feel good, or at least better, and something else, something that we sometimes contrast with our entertainment and maybe call art. How important are these distinctions, and how do they manifest themselves in the American musical? In times of trouble or duress, do we want to escape with light entertainments, or deal with challenging works that make us think about the world, and maybe even provide potential solutions for how to fix it? In the 1930s, you definitely saw a trend away from spectacles on Broadway and towards more serious subject matter. There are several causes for those effects. The lack of money, of course, makes it more difficult to get investment and mount big productions. And the development of the talking motion picture, which coincided with this economic downturn, meant that Hollywood became the new place for big spectacles. There was still a big investment in Hollywood, but the payday was potentially much, much larger. You also had a movement of lots of people to Hollywood, beginning a reversal of the previous trend in which Hollywood came to Broadway, and beginning the century-long trend of theater people moving to film, with some exceptions. Thank you, Scarlett Johansson and Tom Hanks, and others. I love the documentary's descriptions and images from the late 1920s and early 1930s of the, quote, flimsy backstage stories, end quote, that became the staple of early sound films. Essentially, an exercise to put some song and dance numbers on film, not unlike a vaudeville or a Follies. The idea that the world of Broadway became the world of American film and entertainment still has resonance today. Most of our enduring myths about Broadway are actually Hollywood myths, developed and propagated through hundreds of films about Broadway over the decades. If you're interested, some of the great films in this genre are the Broadway melody films, and any film directed by Busby Berkeley, which have some of the most amazing pieces of choral human spectacle in film ever. The dance sequences are incredible. I also recommended the film The Great Ziegfeld for an interesting portrayal of the man and the theater around him during the 1920s especially. The more politically and socially conscious theater that made its way to Broadway in the 1930s reflected the social and political trends of the country. With the Depression, Americans looking for solutions and improvements in their life saw the weaknesses and failures of unfettered capitalism and looked toward more progressive politics for their solutions. The New Deal involved dozens of programs across the nation to develop energy, infrastructure, industry, and even the arts. The Works Progress Administration, the WPA, even created the Federal Theater Project, which helped out-of-work theater professionals get work by funding theater productions across the country. We see this depicted in Cradle Will Rock, where Cherry Jones plays the head of the Federal Theater Project. Cradle Will Rock also shows some of the political tensions in the air during this time. There was a major fear of communism developing, even though Russia was, to this point, still a major ally and would be through World War II. However, the ideological underpinnings of the Cold War were well underway in the 1930s. With poverty comes creative freedom, and so-called book musicals especially took advantage of this in the 1930s. From Of Thee I Sing to Porgy and Bess, we see creatively ambitious works created that were just popular enough for a financially poor, theatrical culture. With the beginnings of World War II and economic growth, the Broadway musical became an important site for patriotism and nationalism. From Irving Berlin's This Is the Army to Oklahoma, the transformation from the politically and socially minded work of the 1930s to a more celebratory, inspirational track came quickly with the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the outbreak of war. As you watch and think about Oklahoma, I'd like you to consider what it says about America. But I ask you not to just look at the romance, the space, the vision, the melodrama of good guy and bad guy. What is the subtext? What is underneath? What is the social structure? Why is Judd, for example, so bad? How is gender treated? Ethnicity or race? What about justice? Look beyond the surface and think about how these things play out in the film. For example, what truths about American justice are revealed in the comic trial scene at the end of the movie? What does it suggest about what is right and wrong, and how it is determined? Is it fair? What is it based on? Do you agree with what happens? These are some things to think about for your forum discussions. Keep up with them, as they really provide a lot of insights for the course. I especially love it when you take the threads your own direction and have some fun with it, which you did, I know, in this first week. Make sure you're really thinking about your midterm and even beginning to think about the subject for your final. We move fast.